so that we'll have it recorded for you. We're waiting for Crystal to log in from Wyoming. She tells me the roads are pretty bad between here and there, and as I said in your email, I'd rather you guys be safe than here. So I have Melissa here in the room with me. So there's only the three of you in the class. So we'll talk about our activities for this week and a little about what the class is going to be. But at 9:30, I'm going to carry the computer with me, and we're going to go into the library for the mod update meeting so that everybody can hear what's going on. Okay?
Okay.
Great. I'm glad you could make it. Get those tires fixed.
Definitely. Definitely. You can literally
Yeah.
the wires on the side.
Oh, yeah. I don't like that sound at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd rather you stay at home then on a day like today. And we'll have to see how the rest of the week turns out since it's supposed to start snowing again tomorrow night. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Nonetheless, have you ever taken a statistics class before?
Yeah, I think I have.
Okay, so you have a little, you have some knowledge of the topic. So, and that's fine. It's not going to change the way I do anything here because as I just told Melissa, this class is as much about how statistics is misused as used. Sounds like we may have, well, I thought maybe we had another person, maybe not. Okay. So, so we're going to be concentrating on that. And one of the things I'm going to do is I have some definition handouts here, which I will find and email to you guys during one of our breaks, I hope. I'll certainly get it to you today. The definitions we'll discuss here in class as well. But I wanted to start off with a little bit of just talking about the class. As you know, we're going to meet Mondays and Wednesdays. Two things. I'm going to remind you now, we go off daylight savings time Sunday morning. So please don't forget that. And the other is that Veterans Day is November 11th, which is 2 weeks from today. And we should be closed. We will be closed that day. So the class will be a recorded Zoom class that you'll see. So so other than that, it'll be composed of the usual suspects here. Each week we will have some readings. You have actually two texts available to you through your through the Canvas shell. One is an open source text from the OpenStax organization that's based out of Rice in Houston. And the other is a text by a guy by the name of Mario Triola. We used to use that one. When you see the readings and tools each week, you will see 2 chapters or more in Triola's book that you can review online. It has a lot of good information in it. We will have discussions each week. I've already posted my first post. The usual here, I'd like you to make sure that you do your first post by Wednesday night. And then really work with each other to discuss these things. And a lot of it has to do, if we take a look at discussion number 1 right away, there's the prompt here is that we can do some surveys. And you've got 3 scenarios to choose from in the background section, and then propose your survey. My discussion is much more general because, of course, I don't want to bias what you write. I want to hear what you think. So that's this, and we're going to be talking about surveys and the presentation of data from surveys this week. So it's a good topic to be concerned about. And of course, we see them all the time. If you're like me, you're online or something, or you're on the telephone talking to someone. Would you take a survey following this call? The answer for me is always no. And part of the reason is that their surveys are usually atrocious. And we'll talk about what that means this week in this class. But one of the problems is I'll give you some examples as well of some surveys that we've had recently where it's impossible to truthfully answer. And to some extent, they're deliberately structured that way, but not to get information, to really make it easy to compile the whatever and short answers. And so we'll talk about what a good survey is as well. Going back on, each week you'll have an assignment. And the assignment this week is related to misleading graphs. There are lots of ways that we can present data to make it look very different than what it actually is, than what the data really are telling us, which is why you need to study the presentation. You've all seen pie charts and what are called histograms, the bar graphs where you have a big thick bar, and variations on all those things. And they can be very useful if properly put together. But we find the people that are doing these things professionally, and especially we see it in advertising and politics, and we'll spend more time on advertising because I don't like to discuss politics, although it will happen here. We'll see some political sorts of things because it's used a lot, but we'll keep it pretty neutral here in terms of what we look at. But the way that people put together the information and present it can be very, very misleading. Okay, and then of course there's going to be an assessment each week. I will be adding a page to each week of the recorded Zoom sessions because at least Crystal cannot be here on Wednesdays because of her work schedule. So we'll always have some recorded Zoom sessions. You still need to come to class as much as possible because the recorded sessions you won't be able to do the in-class activities very well. So we'll have to figure out how to do those things. In-class activities each week will be related to the material that we are looking at. In this week, may be a little difficult, especially if Wednesday turns out to be a nasty day. But we're going to be looking at the presentation of data. So it's related to the misleading graphs. And it will play into, obviously, your discussion, but we don't want to make that the discussion. What we want to do is really look at something a little different than you would do in the discussion on that, because there's so much out there that we can look at. As I say, I will present a few things to you in the course of the class. Okay. So any questions so far? Okay.
No.
Great. Then let's see. So let's take a look first at the textbooks. If you go up to Course Home, you're going to see a couple of things. You have introductory statistics.pdf, and that is the Triola course. It is actually the statistics text we have used for years here, and I've taught out of for quite some time. here. It's actually a very good statistics test or text. It is really, we don't obviously go through the entire text. It's a 500-page text, but it has all the material in it, and I'll be using a bunch of that for in the class. If you look down further, we have the Vital Source ebook. If you click on that, it'll open a tab that you then click on to open the text. You've been here before with these online text. It'll open the text in a different tab. And so this is also what you will see in the week overview each week. So the week overview will really look at a lot of that will be referred to here in the course media page, will be related to this open source textbook. So we'll go there and look at that. I've already opened it, so I'm simply going to open it here. And so we're going to be working here in looking at the presentation of data, especially here in Chapter 1. A lot of definitions that we'll use throughout the class. I will give you definition sheets each week that will cover, that'll be really related to the material for the week, so that I don't overload you right now with a bunch of stuff that you might think you need to read to get this week's work done. That's not the idea. So you can download part of the book. You can go to each chapter. If you look at the here on the right side of the page, you've got sections of each chapter, key terms, and a review. We will have, let's see, do we have, yes. It looks like Crystal's on. Crystal, if you're on, can you unmute your mic and say hello, please?
Hello.
Hi, welcome to class.
Thanks.
We started a few minutes ago. I'm recording it. I'll be putting it up, and you can read it. You can watch the first part of the class later on.
I've been here since you started.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I missed that. All right, super. Well, I'm glad you're on. So there's 3 of you in the class. Candy is also online because she's not able to drive today. And Melissa's here in class. So the 3 of you will be working, sort of together, sort of separately throughout the class. When you're all in class together, we're going to do some in-class work.
Okay.
We'll do our in-class activities that way. Wednesday may be another day that is going to be iffy for getting here. And I know you can't be here on Wednesday, so I will be figuring out how to do the in-class exercise this week and passing that on to you guys, probably by email.
Okay.
At some point. So the textbook here, this particular textbook is structured a bit different from the secondary book that we'll also be using, but is actually reasonably a good explanation and introduction. Hello, Amanda.
Hi, good morning. So you have mod updates on your calendar. We've got 2 students on campus, so we're going to do mod updates on Wednesday.
Mod updates on Wednesday. Excellent. Great. Thank you, Amanda. So we won't be leaving the room this morning. Okay. Yeah, I guess it's Julissa came in because I saw her go by. So, okay. Interesting. All right, it's being one of those days. I don't know about you guys, but we didn't have more than about an inch last night at our house in Loveland. So, and it's been an interesting weekend. I was telling Melissa that Susan and I went down to Albuquerque for a wedding late last week, and The wedding was on Friday, and we were going to spend 2 days driving back. And then we started hearing about this scary snowstorm, and I've done enough white knuckle driving already in my life. I don't need any more of it unnecessarily. So we drove back in a long day on Saturday, and the storm fizzled. That's Colorado weather. But anyway, so we'll just start swinging into the work. What I want to do this morning is for the rest of this first hour, what I want to do is talk about definitions and the concepts, and we'll pull a few things out of the textbooks and talk about those. And then we'll take a break and then come back, and I'll find some material during the break that I can send to you that can get you started on the week's assignment. And then what I would like to do after we've been at this for maybe an hour and a half or possibly a little bit more, is we'll switch over to having you guys get started, and I'll keep the Zoom session open so that you can get started on the assignment and ask questions when you need to. So the Zoom session will probably go on for quite some time officially, but the actual live part for all four of us, where it's being more formal in terms of lecture and conversation, will probably not be more than an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. But I do want you guys to get started on these, on the assignments, and be able to then ask questions as the need arises. And we'll discuss the assignment in more detail. There's a couple of downloadable documents that you can work with, and we'll discuss that in more detail after we get finished with, or later on in the class. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to assume that means yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the second book, which is the one that's the statistics, is this book here. Let's see. I want to go back to the table of contents. Is this book by Triola, Introduction to Statistics. And I'm not sure why this pretty young lady is there, but let's just talk about this because it takes us straight into the subject of this week's work, which is surveys. And this is actually a really good example of why surveys can be misleading. Okay, so here we have a survey that was done by America Online, and they surveyed a lot of different people to get to answer the question, have you ever been hit by a computer virus? Now that's a pretty open question. And actually, I think probably every single one of us is going to say yes to that, because we've all had viruses hit our computers. It's very hard not to. Even if you have the best antiviral stuff in Windows Defender, or I use Avast, which is a free service, or Norton, which is little more than a virus itself as far as I'm concerned, the way it functions, or Kaspersky or McAfee or any of those, it doesn't matter. Viruses get through because the guys creating them are ahead of the curve, because of course they can't defend against something that hadn't been created yet. So they're always behind. But if we take a look at this data, have you ever been hit by a computer virus? Yes, 106,685 yes votes. No, 63,378. Well, if we look at that, 63,000 is about 60% of 106,000. But if we look at this chart, it looks like the yeses are about 3 times the no's. And why is that? It's because this number, this axis here, the vertical axis, starts at 40,000. If it started at 0, it would have looked very much like approximately, this one would have been relatively approximately up to here where my cursor is moving. That would look very different. This is misleading, okay? Why did they do that? So the total number of respondents was 170,000 plus, and that's a pretty large number. So it sounds like they ought to get really good results. The larger, mantra says the larger the number, the more generalizable are the results. However, that only holds if you follow certain standards that statisticians have determined for doing this kind of survey. So many of these polls, in fact, most of them, if you see all the political polls, they'll talk in a survey of 1,053 adult likely voters. Okay, that sounds good. 1,000 people's a lot. But considering that we probably have 120 million people eligible to vote in this country, well, no, more like close to 200 million eligible voters in this country. That's not a big group. So one of the things is also how do you choose these? Okay, so they were selected by AOL, America Online, sending out an email saying, "Would you participate in this question?" Well, when this is called a voluntary survey, voluntary in that all surveys ultimately have a voluntary component. You can always say no. However, what this boils down to is that the people who do these things, especially when they are online surveys, are what we call voluntary. They opt in. They usually have a reason for doing so. They feel strongly about the topic, or rarely they feel like the answer needs to be done, needs to be gotten. So these are these results have these two flaws, and the second one is the presentation. So if we go to the next page and you navigate this through partial pages, so we talked about the misleading graph, and really. We'll be getting to deceptive graphing later, but that's a good example of it. As I said, it looks like it's almost 3 times, and in reality, it isn't. And the sampling method is what I said about voluntary responses. Okay, so these that have an interest. So in it, we'll answer. Those that have no interest aren't going to participate. They'll just click through. Quite frankly, I'm one of those guys. I almost always refuse to participate in a survey unless I can see that there is some good to come out of it. And then we have to look at the questions itself. This looks like fairly simple. It's yes or no. The problem with yes or no is that you get no real context. Yes, I've been hit with a computer virus. No, I don't care because I don't use a computer anymore. There's a lot of things going on with that. So we have to, and the population there is actually limited. It's limited to AOL users. Okay, so and AOL, of course, is no longer the preferred internet service provider or any of that. But nonetheless, the the issue is that we don't have a broad swath of the population. This is narrow. Now that's fine if what you're looking at is should AOL provide better viral protection as part of its package. That then is a good reason to limit. But just asking that question broadly without putting any context on that is really not going to get you what you want. The best of all surveys are what we call random, meaning various, and there are lots of ways. We'll talk about how we choose who we survey. There's lots of methods of obtaining of random surveys like this. But if you don't randomize it, then again, what you're doing is you're skewing the data. Again, excuse me.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
What textbook are you working out of?
If you go to the course home week, you'll see the introductory statistics PDF,
Okay.
and that's the one I'm using. I'll be going back and forth between this one and the OpenStax text
Oh,
because I like their examples here.
okay, thanks.
Okay, you should be able to get that. Melissa, you were able to get it, right?
No, I'm still.
Oh, it should be there. Let me go back to, if we go back to course modules, I'm here. We've got introductory statistics.pdf. You don't have that one?
Yeah, I don't have it on mine either.
Okay, let's see. Somehow or another it got unpublished. Okay, if you refresh your page, you should see it now.
I was like, what are we? Because like I was looking at the textbook and I was like, it doesn't look the same. I was like, where is? Okay, thank you.
Somehow or another, both of those got unpublished here, and I don't understand why. But you should be able to get it now. Crystal, I hope you've been able to get it too. So you want right now I'm in the PDF.
Yeah, I'm trying to refresh it right now to find it.
Okay. It should come right on. So let me know when you've got it up. Sorry
Okay.
about that. I didn't realize that it wasn't, that it had been unpublished because I was checking everything yesterday and it was all ready. And I've not tried, they've got this thing down here in the bottom when you open the textbook that says that they've got a read aloud feature, which I've never tried. If there are parts of this that you want to print, feel free to do so. And as you know, even though maybe I'm not supposed to say this, I'm going to say it anyway. You may want to do that when you come to school because then we pay for the paper and ink. And I am not a fan of online texts.
The introductory links me to the open, or what the open is.
Yeah.
It
The
does.
book as the course media.
I'll be darned. If you go through course media, you're going to end up in OpenStax. If you go back to course modules and look in the course home module, the introductory statistics PDF, do you see that on your screen?
My computer's really slow today.
Ah,
I'm waiting to go back.
aha. Yeah, if you go to course media as well, you've got chapter 1 and 2 here as well.
Yeah, those are the open stack.
These are OpenStax chapters?
Yeah.
Very interesting. All right. See, I just went straight to the textbook. Have you found the PDF introductory statistics in course home?
I did find it, but I can't open it.
Really?
My computer's just being really slow, so I had to read it.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's keep going because these are good examples, and I'll figure out how to make that work and let you guys know, okay?
Okay.
All right, so I'm back at this. So when it's voluntary, when a sampling technique is voluntary, it's not what we call random. Random is when you literally identify a population of people you want to survey. In the case of the AOL survey, their population would have been AOL users. Okay. Then randomly, you choose a group of people to approach and to participate in the survey. And by randomly, there are lots of ways. There are lots of computer programs and other things that randomly select identified targets, say, subjects for anything. And random, in this case, would be that nobody does any bias. You're not just picking on somebody whose name you like or whatever. You just really literally use some sort of algorithm to choose, without any specific bias, a group of people of a certain size, understanding that you're not going to get 100% participation. So you make it large enough that if this randomly selected group, half of them drop out, you still have the number of subjects that you need, okay? When you just make it totally voluntary, again, it's people that actually, for whatever reason, have a strong opinion, want to participate, whatever. If your method of selection is not appropriate, the data may be useless. And I love his statement here. No amount of statistical torturing can salvage them. So by that, they mean trying to make sense out of the data. And this is done a lot, especially in the advertising world. And to also to a great extent in the world of politics. But let's take a look at some definitions to start with. Data. Data can be information that you gather in a survey or some sort of test. Data is a very, very broad term, and there are lots of different kinds of data. The officially one piece of data is called a datum. This is a Latin term. And so, but we don't see that used a lot. A lot of people will ignore that the data itself as a word is a plural. This can be numbers. It can be labels. It can be names. It can be colors. It can be scientifically, when we do a series of experiments to test a hypothesis, we come up with information. That information can vary all over the place, but a lot of times it's numbers or results of some sort. In the pharmaceutical industry, we do a lot of work, experiments, accumulating data about potential drugs that we want to develop. The initial data could be toxicology in animals. How many animals died at this dose? How about how many animals died at the next dose? Okay, and it goes on from there. It can be, we have lots of things that are done. You'll see some what sound to be fairly trivial surveys here in this, like what's your favorite color? I mean, I don't know why anybody cares about that, other than, of course, clothing manufacturers want to know what the current favorite color of the season is, or the year, or whatever. Let's take a look at the word statistics. And this is, broadly speaking, a science and where we plan studies and or experiments. We obtain data and then organize the data, present the data, analyze and interpret, and then based on all of that, draw conclusions. Sometimes we find that conclusions cannot be drawn, and that's okay. But the purpose of statistics is to evaluate data and draw conclusions. Now let's take a look at another term that we're going to see, a population. A population is the complete collection of all measurements or data being considered. So a population is a complete package of all of the data, and a lot of times data can be matched. Okay, by matched I mean that what we have is there's one that we may run into. It looks at the fat content of muffins, or possibly the gluten content of muffins. And so we match, so we have a specific muffin manufacturer and type that they're manufacturing a specific product. That's data. It happens to be what we call label data, ordinal data, as opposed to numerical data. And then we have the gluten content for each one. So that pair is what we call a matched pair. In other words, we can't really compare. What we're doing is we're looking at, okay, muffin X contains this much gluten, muffin Y contains this much. And then we need to be looking at how truly matched is it? Is one muffin a 6-ounce muffin and the other one a 3-ounce? So we want to really be careful that we are looking at our data and comparing what we call apples to apples at all times. Okay. Now we have another term that you see a lot, and those terms are census and sample. A census is the collection of data from every member of a population. The most common use of the word, or the most commonly seen true census in the United States, of course, is the 10-year census, which will happen next year, where we make an effort to collect data, at least some data, from every single household in the United States. And we have many reasons for that. We won't go into the constitutional reasons for it, but it's very critical that we get every single household. And of course we can't. I've actually worked on the census and headed up some rather interesting roads in the mountains trying to find houses that weren't returning their census forms. But a census is everybody or everything. To go back to the muffins and gluten, a census of those would cover every single muffin made anywhere in the United States or imported into the United States from anywhere. A sample is a subset of the members that are selected. So that's what we see for the most part. The AOL one looks like a great big number, and it is. It's a pretty good number, but it wasn't a census because every single AOL member did not respond. It was a sample, and a sample is it then is used to generalize to the entire population. Okay. Sometimes we can't. I mean, if you look at the US Census, we can't generalize a lot of the information. Who cares what the average age of the society is? Well, some people do. I mean, but nonetheless, it doesn't, most of us don't. However, with a sample, we use that to say that we are going to say that, and political samples are a good one, and I'm going to use that. Samples currently saying that, 52% of the American people are in favor of continuing the process of impeachment against our current president. That wasn't done by surveying everybody in the United States. It was done with usually around 1,000 people. The surveys I've seen have ranged from about 920 to about 1,050. Okay, so what they're saying is that in their sample, this many people said that. Now, a sample, since we are generalizing a sample to the wide population, and we're looking at maybe 1,000 people out of, say, 200 million potential voters. Okay, there's a chance that those data will not be precise, meaning exact. So that's why you see in any of these, the margin of error is 4%. So when you see that, you look at those results and you see, say, 52% favor continuing with impeachment, margin of error 4%. That means it's anywhere from 48 to 56, meaning that roughly half, essentially, of the population is in favor of this. So we have to be careful with those generalizations and understand that there is what we call an error bar. If that error bar is big, then we've been asking the wrong questions. Or our sample is too small. Or, again, our method of selection was flawed. Okay, so let's take a look here down the rest of this page, and look at another example of a question about fear of identity theft. Okay, and again, Gallup Corporation's been taking polls for ages. They still blow it fairly often. In fact, everybody who does these things blows it fairly often. 1,013 adults in the United States randomly selected and surveyed about identity theft. So they probably approached 2 or 3 times that number, but it was random. So they didn't bias their selection process. To some extent, it's biased, has to be, because the people that chose to respond, for some reason, chose to. Sometimes people are paid. I get a little queasy about paid surveys. I've actually run a bunch doing market research. Marketing is real bad about that. That's a great way to have some interesting results. But anyway, saying 66%, or about 2/3, worried about identity theft frequently or occasionally. And that says that the other 34% don't worry about it at all. So, which I find kind of interesting. And they, so looking at it, obviously the author of the textbook has taken a look at the details of this, because you can usually, when these things are posted, you can find the details of how they selected their participants. And so his judgment is that they appear to have used a sound method of selecting those adults. In this case, the population consists of, and he gives this huge number, and I want to talk about this number briefly. 241,472, or 241,472,385. Now that says that's a real exact number. Actually, it can't be, because the population, of course, is constantly changing. And of course, it's much higher now. It's about 350 million of us. So, but the point here is it's not practical to survey everybody for this kind of thing. First off, if you tried, it would be hideously expensive and probably take you 2 years. And you would acquire so much data, it'd probably take you 2 more years to analyze it. So we use these things. So we use the sample to draw a conclusion. Okay, so if we go down a little further on this page, we find, let's see if I can make this work. We find that we use these things once we get these, we look at them and find a way to present it. And there's lots of ways. We'll talk about those. If we go to the next page here, we're asking our questions. And when we look at that survey, first off, we need to be aware. I want to go back to that number of 241,000, blah, 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 blah. It looks like it's a really precise number. And it is a precise number in terms of mathematical precision, in terms of, remember the term from algebra, significant digits. Any non-zero digit that's not in the middle of a string of, or any non-zero digit that is at the beginning or end of a number is considered significant. So if someone told me there were exactly 1,001 marbles in a jar, that would be 4 significant figures. If you said there's about 1,000, the zeros at the end do not count as significant because you've rounded things off, you've estimated. So don't get confused by very precise numbers. One of the misuses that people put to statistics is to say, we surveyed 6,742 people. Well, that sounds like a pretty accurate number. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. The other thing that doesn't say is, well, only 4,002 of them participated. Okay, so we have to be a little bit careful about that. So don't be confused about big strings of numbers and think that they must be accurate. Because again, if we take a look at at Google's world population number, if you've ever looked at that page, you'll see that Google estimates the population of the world on a continual basis, and it's just this number. It's constantly going up. At least we hope it goes up. Anyway, but what we want to do is first off, when we're looking at a survey, we want to know, what are we doing? What's the goal? Okay. Are the data, what do they mean? I mean, again, we can ask lots of questions, but the data often can be meaningless. and in terms of, and meaningless means meaningless in this case means that you can't get any conclusions from it. Because all of this stuff is going to mean something to someone. Are they from a source with a special interest so that there is pressure to obtain results favorable to that source? One of the current major criticisms of the pharmaceutical industry is that they publish all these studies showing how wonderful their drugs are. And the suspicion is that the studies have been designed to show exactly that. And there was a long time when people that were doing these studies were actually paid consultants to the pharmaceutical company. Well, that biases. Now, if you read, and I know most of you probably don't read a lot of clinical study reports, but if you read them when they present these things, they will put a disclaimer at the end saying that they are funded by SmithKline Pharmaceuticals, or funded by some other group that has an interest in the results. So it's very difficult, and in fact, later on in this class, I will talk about what we do in the pharmaceutical industry, at least to try and get rid of that bias. And it really does say a lot about how we can collect data that are actually objective. Okay, the sampling method, where they collect it in a way that's unbiased. I mean, there are lots of sampling methods, and we'll talk about that. The analysis, the graphing, of the data, you have to look at the data. We'll talk about things like outliers, anyway, numbers that are way away from the rest. It's real common. One of my favorites is a bunch of data about what colleges pay football head coaches. And there's a whole bunch of them that pay in the range of several $100,000 a year, which sounds like an awfully nice salary to me, especially compared to the salary of the professors at those same schools. And then you've got a couple that are out at $2.5 million. Well, that's a long way from the rest. That's what we call an outlier. And how do you deal with outliers? Because if the data are real, you can't ignore them. And the tendency is to ignore the things that are way away from the norm, what we think of as the norm, but in fact are not. So that has to do with the distributed. Missing data, okay? Did a whole, and did you have a very high rate of refusal to respond? And how does that affect the results, okay? So there's lots of ways of statistical methods. We'll look at those, and significance. Statistical significance simply means that the numbers, the analysis shows that this one group is one thing and another group is different, and that there is a measurable and significant difference between them. Okay. Sometimes that statistical difference can be small, sometimes it can be large, but do they have any practical significance? Okay, and we'll talk about practical significance. Okay, let's just take a look here. This is another one I like because it hits a couple of things that really have been somewhat of a bugaboo to me. And we're going to do this and then take a short break. This table here that I'm showing looks at some study that was done on a hypothesis that people with higher IQs had more brains, of larger brain volume. Okay, so what we have is, again, this is a matched pair. The data themselves correspond to the idea of a matched pair because this IQ here, 96, corresponds to the same patient's brain volume of about a quart, 1,005 milliliters, cubic centimeters. Milliliters is the same thing. But we go to the next person, lower IQ, higher brain volume. Higher IQ, slightly, 101. Now remember the issue of IQ, and this is one of the reasons I love such a study. First off, IQ is virtually meaningless. How old are these patients? Okay, because IQ is a measure of what you know compared to what you should know at your age. So almost by definition, IQ begins to fall as we get older because we've accumulated all this knowledge and that we're supposed to have. Are there still, and so 100 is basically, an IQ of 100 is that you know what you're supposed to know at your age, right? So IQ testing has always been one of my bugaboos, because it doesn't say a thing about different learning styles and different interests, because it's almost all academic. For instance, I have a pretty good IQ when it comes to things like chemistry and physics and math. My IQ when it comes to automobile repair is probably around 50 or 40. Very, very low. And yet, the mechanic we take our car to, he knows his stuff inside and out. His IQ is much higher. So, okay, we have a chat here. All right, we have a chat here. Okay, we will get to telling the difference of these things as part of it. So the question here, how can we tell the difference between true and accurate study versus a graph that wants us to believe them? For instance, in political realm right now, there's talking about junk science, a poll that was out on oil and gas harming the ecosystem, but in fact, a new study says it has no harm. Again, we have to be looking at the exact study. We have to look, first off, who commissioned the study, who paid for it, and what was their skin in the game. We can talk about that particular one as much as you like, but it's very complex. But I was reading something recently about the oil and gas industry in the 1970s. Their scientists were publishing studies showing that the climate was changing. And yet, when all of this really got going in terms of the climate change, what happened next was they started commissioning and studies, or they started commissioning sites and funding websites that were denying that. And yet, at the same time, when ExxonMobil was doing this in the 80s, when climate change was starting to be talked about, ExxonMobil looked at the data and immediately started raising all of their offshore drilling platforms above the level that the seas were expected to rise. So what does that mean? Again, it gets into politics and economics and other things. All you can do is look at who did the study, who funded it, and how are they giving us the data? There are lots of ways. We'll talk about more of that, but we can get to that. That's a good question, and it's part of what we're going to be discussing during this month. Okay, so let's take a look. If we look at this, again, we've got 101 IQ with a brain size of 1,281 cubic centimeters. That's a pretty big head. But an IQ of 127 with a brain size significantly smaller, about 150 cubic centimeters smaller. So I look at this and I say, there's no correlation. Okay, they're not related. Now, I haven't analyzed the data, you know, and there are, we can go into how that's, we will be going into how that's done. So I'm going to go to the next page right now. And so, yeah, we're a little bit late on our first break. We're supposed to take a first break. So I'm going to pause the recording right now. And we'll take a short break. So, so our sampling method in that table were between 24 and 43 years of age. Now, here's where, again, my statement about IQ comes into play. You learn a lot between 24 and 43. I remember, you know, that goes back to an old joke, a Mark Twain line, which was, it was amazing how smart my father became between my ages of 18 and 21. So it all depends on your definitions, and it all depends on the group. They all had at least a high school education. Again, at least a high school education. So that implies that there are some college educated people here. They will have accumulated more facts, and that's what we measure in our IQ tests, is facts. So you can have people who have absolutely no college education, but who are interested in everything and read everything they can get their hands on. They're going to be as smart as people with PhDs by IQ measurements. So you have to be careful with that. So the polls that we're going to talk about, and I've got a couple. One of the things that I want to send to you is a handout, multi-page handout on how to do surveys. So and I'll send it to you, and I probably will have copies of it here on Wednesday, assuming we have class on Wednesday. I want to send it to you just in case. So we talked about voluntary response samples. So these are things that are very common. The internet polls are essentially all voluntary. The only time, you know, you have some polls here and some surveys here that are not voluntary. At the end of every class, the first thing you have to do to log into your class on the last week is actually take a poll. That means that what we are doing is a census of each class. Everyone has to do this unless they simply don't finish the class. Mail-in polls, again, those go straight in the trash in our house. And telephone call polls. I am often not very polite to telephone pollsters because I don't like to be bugged by such things, but that's my choice. Let's take a look at another example of voluntary response. And this is another one. This is a political thing, but it was done for the 1936 presidential election, done by the Literary Digest, a major magazine at the time. I think they probably still are in existence, but I think you probably only see it in libraries. I don't know anyone who actually subscribes to it, but at that time, a lot of people were subscribers to the Literary Digest. A couple of things about them. They generally were wealthier. They generally were conservative. And so the Literary Digest conducted this poll to to try and determine the outcome of the 1936 presidential election between Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Alf Landon. They got 2.3 million responses. That is a pretty high response rate. And again, it may be reflective of the interest this particular group of people had in that election, meaning that it was not a great sampling technique. At the same time, Gallup had a much smaller poll. They actually polled 50,000 people, which is a huge poll for that time. And in the Literary Digest predicted that Alf Landon would win the presidency fairly significantly, and Gallup went the other way. And indeed, Roosevelt won, as we know, since he served he was elected 4 times. But the sampling method was the problem. As I said, the people subscribing to the Literary Digest were wealthier. They tended to be Republicans. So they were going to vote for Alf. Whereas Gallup looked at other factors at the time. Now, Gallup also incorrectly predicted the Truman-Dewey election in 1948, when everybody thought that Truman, who was widely disliked, was going to easily lose to Dewey. Of course, we know that didn't happen. So when you draw conclusions based on voluntary data, it's very, very tricky. Can voluntary data be useful? Yes, it can. Sometimes you really do need to hear what the voluntary data are going to tell you. Going back to the AOL thing, yes, it was a voluntary response. What it showed us correctly was that most people had experienced a problem with a virus, and that's as much as you can say from that. Let's take a look at a couple of other things. When we are doing the analysis, we can, after we consider our context, the source of data and the method, we find a way to present the data in hopefully as honest a way as possible, rather than in a way to bias the reader. But that's one of the places that we'll see lots of things being done. And then statistical methods of analysis, we'll get into that, means and averages and standard deviations and variances and so forth. We'll get into that later in the course of the class here. And significance, okay? Significance is really something that you need to understand in the context of likelihood. The examples here of getting 98 girls in 100 random births is very statistically significant, because it's not likely that this is going to happen by random chance. Even though, as one neonatologist friend of mine told me one time, all of us are conceived female and somewhat less than half of us degenerate into males. We know that there is a slight excess of female babies, but very, very slight. Getting 98 out of 100 in a random sample is very unlikely that would occur by chance. But getting 52 is pretty reasonable. 52 out of 100. I mean, that sounds like 52%, which is higher than the number we know that is real based on millions of births. But in only looking at 100, this could easily occur randomly, and therefore there's no real difference there between male and female. It's sort of like saying, okay, this is with a margin of error of 4%, 48 to 56, which means that the men then could be 52 to 44 by the same thing. And practical is looking at, and I love this example that we're going to see next. Practical is looking at, okay, is it enough? Is it something that has any practical value to it? And in this example, the Atkins weight loss program, 40 subjects were using the program, had a mean weight loss of 4.6 pounds after a year, based on a published study of several. We've got, the Atkins diet, the Dean Ornish diet, Weight Watchers, Zone, and so forth, looking at weight loss and heart disease risk reduction. The Ornish diet is really more about heart disease risk, by the way. And in this group of people, using these analysis, found out that we can conclude that the mean weight loss of 2.1 kilos or 4.6 pounds is statistically significant. That's based on the diet appears to be effective based on the statistical criteria. However, using common sense, it does not seem to be worthwhile to use a weight loss program with a relatively insignificant result, 4.6 pounds in a year. You can lose 4.6 pounds on whatever diet you're on by simply walking around the block 3 or 4 times a day. Okay? So is it worth it to go in and change your diet and do all sorts of things to lose a little bit of weight? So while 2.1 kilos or 4.6 pounds was, from a statistical analytical standpoint, significant, from a practical standpoint, most people are going to say, so what? I don't care. Excuse me. Change of weather always makes me sneeze a lot. I'm happy I'm not blasting you guys' ears out. Okay, so that goes back to the practical significance, and we have to be aware that that there are times when we see these statistical differences, and we see them especially in political polling. We'll see statistical differences that if you look at it and say, I can't tell the difference between that and the other way around, just based on what we're seeing. So we have to be careful how we accept these things. Conclusions. There's a wonderful example that we have to be careful about conclusions, because just because X happens and Y happens at the same time doesn't mean that they're related. The example is the price of a slice of pizza in New York City. If we look at the slice of pizza in New York City and we compare it to subway fares in New York City, every time the price of pizza goes up, the subway fare goes up. They're not related because it does not make any sense if you look at it to say just because the price of pizza goes up, subway fares go up. What does that mean? Do the people working on the subway only eat pizza? What is the real issue? And of course, the real issue is that it's all related to inflation, because you can track it through to inflation. So you have to be careful that you don't assume causation. In other words, that because X happens, Y happens, that X is causing Y. Doesn't happen. So in another way, so that's something that we need to be aware of. Also, when we're looking at things, there's 2 ways you can get data. You can ask other people for their information, or you can get it yourself. Going up here to the weight loss study, they probably weighed the patients themselves, because patients who want to lose weight will report more weight loss than they actually experience. Also, when you're doing a study, how do you collect your information? Looking at things like blood pressure, for instance. People who are supposed to monitor blood pressure should be taking their blood pressure at the same time every day, preferably when they get up before they start any of their daily activities, using the same equipment and method every single day, and recording it. People aren't going to do that. So you get up and you forget, and you start running around, and you've gone outside and you've dug in the garden. Oh yeah, I need to take my blood pressure. Oh gee, it's high. Oh gee, I wonder. So you must, it's better, far better for you to collect it yourself, because you're going to get things that fit the parameters of your study. And then another thing is small samples. You cannot say that because a class of 3 people, nobody came to class that day, it's because the instructor's bad. 2 people did not come to class today because it wasn't safe for them to get here. You have to look at the whole picture, plus large samples. And that's one of the problems with our little surveys. At the end of each class, if you've got 3 students in a class, and one student really hated the class and downgraded the instructor, well, then his survey looks pretty awful, right? So we have to look at sample size as well. And we see this example, this study of Children's Defense Fund, Children Out of School study, among secondary schools students suspended in one region, 67% were suspended at least 3 times. Turned out that's only based on 3 students, so 2 of them were suspended 3 times. That is absolutely meaningless. And when you fail to report that, it makes it look much more important than it is. Okay, and you need to be careful what your questions are. You can load your questions, and believe me, marketers and political pollsters and almost everyone can load their questions in a way that really skews the results. My mother-in-law, who passed this summer, spent the last 6 months of her life on hospice, home hospice. And we also had several caregiver groups to come in and help take care of her, so that we could get out and do things like me come and teach. We go out and shop, go out and maybe occasionally even have a date, for heaven's sake. Excuse me again. So one group sent us a survey about the caregiver that they had sent out, and said, okay, how do you rate this caregiver? Well, they had sent us 2 caregivers. Okay. One of them came in the house wearing her oxygen tank. She's supposed to take care of my 98, 99-year-old mother-in-law. And who's taking care of whom here, And the other was good, but her personality didn't mesh with the family. So, we didn't particularly. So we got this survey, and we looked at it, and it was written, what did you think of your caregiver? And so my wife ended up calling up the agency and saying, well, You know, we had two people and we have very different opinions about the two people. We have to be able to rate both of them. Well, we have to, this has to be anonymous. So you can't. Okay. Then how do we do this? Well, do you want to make it good or bad? And I said, if I say good, then I'm praising the person that wasn't. If I say bad, I'm punishing the person who was. You know, what kind of a question? We finally ended up saying, we're not filling it out, you know, because you cannot give us the choices that we need to give you honest feedback to help you improve your agency. They didn't like that. But we can load our questions, okay? I love this. Two different wordings of a question. 97% yes. Should the president have the line item veto to eliminate waste? I don't know if you know what a line item veto is, but if you look at bills that are passed by Congress, there are many, many things in it. And a line item veto says that the president can cross out that expenditure, but it doesn't negate the whole budget process. Now, currently, without a line item, if he doesn't like it, either has to accept it or veto the whole bill. Okay, so 97% said when the question was, should the president have the line item veto to eliminate waste? 97% said yes. Should the president have the line item veto or not? However, only 57% said yes. So they were asked, they were given a very specific use of it, which many of us might say, yeah, let's eliminate that waste. Same thing on another survey, this conducted in Germany. Would you say that traffic contributes more or less to air pollution than industry? 45% blamed the traffic and 27% blamed industry. The others probably had no opinion. Or let's reverse it. Would you say industry contributes more or less to air pollution than traffic? Results were different. 57% blamed industry instead of 27%. 24% blamed traffic instead of 45%. So very, very different, okay? Very different, okay? So we get non-responses. Either somebody refuses, as we did in the case of the survey I just talked about, or they're just not available. As when I was working with the Census Bureau, I had people that simply either were never home or would see my car come up with its census sign in the window, and they would not answer the door. One of the two. So they refused to participate. Okay, so we do have that. And it's it used to be that people were much more willing, but they're not anymore, for the simple reason that they get inundated by these things. Plus, we have a society of based on fear. People are scared to answer a lot of questions. Missing data. There may be in the pharmaceutical world, when we're doing work with our developing a drug, we have a lot of missing data. Patients drop out of studies. They die, sometimes not totally unrelated to the drug, because people do just simply drop dead. Or they start having very serious reactions, or they simply stop showing up. Okay, so there's a lot of ways that we lose the data, but we do have data up to the point where they're gone, and so we do have to look at how much of that data is missing. If a lot of people are dying in our study, that's scary. That might mean that the drug itself is a cause. But we do have those results. And we do have, and people simply quit. They just say, I'm done, I don't like this. And that's data too, but it's different kind of data. So even, and one thing is, I can tell you from my experience with the census, There are some people you just are never going to get. So the census isn't, in the strictest definition, a true census because we didn't get everybody. But I think that the compliance rate is somewhere between 98 and 99%. So not bad, okay? I mentioned precise numbers. People assume that a precise number is accurate. It isn't. Just especially numbers that can change depending on how much time we have. Okay, percentages. We'll talk about percentages another time. We have, but I love it when somebody says we have had 100% increase in our success rate. No, you can't. That means you've doubled your success rate. That's different. It implies something. And here they're talking about an airline with lost baggage. We've already improved 100% in the last 6 months. You can't. That means there would be absolutely no baggage going missing, which is not true. So, so we have to look at how the studies are reported, and whether or not they're clear. Now, I laugh hard when I see anyone, and a lot of people are guilty of this, anyone saying, I give 110%. You can't. You can only give 100, period. So be careful of those sorts of things. And also 100% of what? I mean, one of my favorites is we see cancer drugs touting we can extend the survival time by 10%, say. 10% of what? A disease like advanced pancreatic cancer with a 90% fatality rate in 6 months. You're going to extend someone's life by 10% on average. That's 0.6 of a month. That's 3 weeks for $50,000. So you need to be careful when you see this. And when someone says, we see this with risk factors. We just see that. I love it when people get on their high horse about diets, and they talk about risk factors. You talking about cutting out sugar, say, and cutting out sugar, or I remember, I love this one. Eating an egg a day is like smoking 5 cigarettes. I heard that in a seminar, and I almost walked out of the seminar at that point. Eating an egg is like smoking 5 cigarettes. In terms of what? Eggs aren't going to cause lung cancer. And I think they were referring to heart disease. Of course, cigarettes are related to heart disease, but I think they were referring to that. But that's not what she said. She just said it's just, and as I say, I almost walked out. If I hadn't had to pay for that seminar, I might have. I probably should have anyway. The rest of the seminar was almost as bad as that. But we see these things, or we see someone that says, if you use some substance, I'm failing to find an example immediately, but you use some substance, your risk of mortality increases by 3%. Okay, well, 3% increase in mortality. What is the mortality rate of people using? If the mortality rate of people using this substance is 5%, or before that is 5%, using this substance adds 3% to that, then that's 3% of 5%, which is 0.15%. or 0.0015 increase. So again, we have to be careful when we see what's being said. You need to put it in context. If first off, we have to remember that the ultimate death rate in our society is 100%. We're all dying, you know. I used to tell my students, and some of you may have already heard this, that birth is a death sentence. You know, the only thing we don't know is when. But if doing something is going to increase your risk of early death, now we can calculate early death if we define what early means. And if to increase the risk of early death, then we need to know what that rate is too. Because it sounds awful until you start tearing it apart and asking yourself, what is really being said here? And what's being said is, again, let's find out who is benefiting from these results. Okay, I'm not going to go into percentages. You've all had basic algebra. Okay. So we're going to go back now, and I'm going to talk about some other definitions. And what I would like to do is see if I can find some other material. I'm going to give you some definitions that we haven't talked about so far. And I'm going to move on in this particular book through some exercises, some of which you may see given to you in the form of in-class exercises. Okay, we're going to look at types of data next. There's lots of, we've defined sample, population, census, and so forth. We also need to understand what is a statistic and what is a parameter, P-A-R-A-M-E-T-E-R. And so we're going to define those. A parameter is a numerical measurement describing some characteristic of a population. We'll get to we'll get into some examples of those in a minute. And a statistic is a numerical measurement describing some characteristic of a sample. Remember, population is the entire data set, and a sample is a small piece of it. Okay? So if we look at population parameter, then we understand that that's related to population. And if we look at sample statistic, if we use those phrases, then we can group those two together. So we know that so this is different than the science of statistics. So let's really understand that we're talking about now a definition of the use of the term statistic here. So there are two possible meanings to statistics. Two or more numerical measurements describing characteristics of samples, or the science of planning the studies. So we have to remember when we use the term, which of these definitions we're involved in. In terms of the broad scope of this class, we're talking about statistics. In each class, we're going to talk about a statistic that's specific to a population that we're dealing with, or a sample that we're dealing with. Okay. So let's take a look at parameter and statistic here and see if this can help. A Harris poll, 2,320 adults in the United. Harris is another large polling organization. Were surveyed about body piercings, and 5% of the respondents said they had a body piercing, but not on the face. Now, that doesn't tell us that only 5% have body piercings, right? 5% have a body piercing, but not on the face. We don't know how many have body piercings on the face, okay? And again, we've got this 241,000 blah, blah, blah adults in the in the United States. So the survey is from that population of all adults. So we've taken a sample of the population of adults. So the population size of that many is a parameter because it's based on the entire population of adults in the United States. So that's a parameter. That's a parameter we work with. A statistic, the sample size of 2320 is a statistic because it's based on the sample, not the entire population. So what we have is a statistic, 2,320 adults, that has been culled from a parameter, 241 plus million. Okay? 5% is another statistic because it's based on the sample, right? Not the entire population. We don't know that even though this 2,320 adults is a pretty good generally statistically valid number, the value of 5% is small enough that it may or may not inflate to the entire population. It's not likely to mean that 10 million people have body piercings, but not on the face. Now, it might these days. An awful lot of people have piercings, but that's a different issue. We've got two other kinds of data that we deal with: qualitative and categorical, or quantitative and categorical, or quantitative and qualitative data. Lately, we've moved toward calling qualitative data categorical to make it clear that that numerical, or what look like numerical data, are not indeed numbers. Zip codes is a prime example of something that is they're numbers, but what they do is they describe a location. They're a label. Okay, so they're qualitative data. So are things like Social Security numbers. But quantitative data represents numbers, numerical data, and it represents something that's counted or measured. Okay, measurement is basically another way of counting, by the way. Categorical names, labels that are not numbers, that representing something that's either counted or measured. But note that we've got some examples here. Quantitative data could be the ages of survey respondents. This can be important if you're doing advertising research. You want to know what are the different attitudes of different age groups in your products. There is, for instance, a very great difference if you're looking at technology usage, like cell phones versus smartphones, you know, dumb phones versus smartphones, if you will. Anyway, you're going to find a difference in the age groups, although many people of my age have gone to smartphones because they're quite useful once we figure out how to use the silly things. But technology usage is age dependent. And so the ages there. If you're developing a new, say, social networking platform, and there's a new one every other week, it seems. But you really want to know what age group's going to use them. You know, right now, it used to be that Facebook was a kid's thing. It was a young person's thing. Well, now the young people have gone away from Facebook. Facebook's, nah, I never look at it. And, you know, and it's moved into my age group. We use Facebook more, those of us that use it at all. And a lot of people don't use it at all. So it just depends. Categorical data as labels are things like party affiliations or what is your favorite brand of coffee? Most people that drink coffee have a favorite source of some sort or a standard one. What is your favorite color? You know, blah, blah, blah. Categorical data that are numbers are things like the jersey number on your favorite sports figure. Has no meaning other than that person. And so if you look at that, they don't count anything. They don't measure anything. They just tell you who it is. You don't have to, you see number 24 running down the field, you know who it is. You know, and back 20 years ago, you saw the guy carrying the football with a 7 on his jersey, you knew it was John Elway, if he was a Bronco. So we can, but with quantitative data, we must tell people what the numbers are. Are they dollars? Are they distances? Are they years? Are they whatever? Are they any unit of measurement? And there are hundreds of thousands of those out there. Because again, you want to be sure that you're comparing like to like. And we use only one in any survey. Don't give people a choice of answering, what do you weigh in kilos versus pounds? Because then you're going to have to convert those things to the other to report them, to one or the other. You must choose, okay? There's discrete data and there is continuous data, okay? Discrete data is quantitative and the number of values is countable. In other words, it's finite. If there are infinite values, if there are infinite numbers, if there are infinitely many values that you can have, the collection is countable if it's possible to count them individually, such as the number of tosses of a coin. Okay? Because it can be any number you want. It can be up to millions if you want. But you need to be able to count them individually. If we toss a coin, does it come down heads or tails? Period. So if we're doing an analysis of how many times a coin comes up heads, we can do that 10 times. We can do it 1,000,000 times. We can do it 1,000,000,000 times. And so it depends on the amount of time and effort we want to put into the study. So it has to be countable. Usually the number has to be finite. I mean, with you know, you can say, you know, heads or tails. You got 2 answers. The chances of a coin landing on its side, on its edge and standing there are infinitesimally small. Can it be done? Well, I've never seen it. That doesn't mean it can't happen. It just means I've never seen it. There's continuous number where there's a range of possibilities. Okay, for your parameter. So let's get into you know, a couple of examples of these things. Go to the next page here. The concept of countable, we talked about countable data, and we talked about that on the previous page. It's not that easy to really grasp. I mean, it sounds like it, but it really isn't from a statistical science viewpoint. So let's take a look at discrete versus continuous data. Discrete data of the finite type. In other words, there's a limited number of possible values. Number of eggs that a hen lays in 1 week are discrete because they're finite numbers. 5, 7, 12. Got a particularly prolific chicken, she might get a dozen eggs in a week. Because they are finite numbers. They're even numbers. You won't lay half an egg. Young chickens lay small eggs, but that doesn't make them half an egg. It's just a little egg. Okay. Discrete data that's infinite, the number of dies, number of rolls of a die that is required to get an outcome of 2. You could roll a die forever, theoretically, and never get a 2. Not likely. If you roll it enough, there's only 6 possible results from rolling 1 die, or at least a standard 6-sided die. There's only 6 possible results. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And so you expect after some number of rolls, you're going to get at least 1 value of 2. But it might take a while sometimes because of the randomness of the way things fall, unless the dice is loaded, of course. But you can count those numbers as you proceed. And it doesn't matter if you want 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000. You can count them all. And then you can record the number of times 2 comes up. Or you can stop when you reach 2. And then repeat the experiment and see what happens. See if you get the same result twice. Continuous data is an example here. A cow might yield an amount of milk that can be anywhere from about 0 liters. And remember, a liter is about a quart, and 7,000 liters in a year. And we're talking about a year. And since cows don't produce even numbers of liters, there's literally an infinite number of values between 0 and 7,000 liters. You can start off with 0.1 liter or 0.01 liter or even less. Okay. So, but it's impossible to count the number of possible values that are there on that scale. We're only limited. We generally do only count certain things because we are limited in the smallness of the difference between 2 different measurements. But it can be anywhere on that scale. The weight of babies at birth runs generally in a fairly narrow range, usually anywhere from about 5 to 8.5 or 9 pounds. Much less for premature babies, much more for very large babies. I think I read about a baby that was born at 28 pounds, which makes me think, God, that must have hurt the mother to give birth to that one. I think it was by C-section. But nonetheless, you get the idea. So think about this, and I will be forwarding you some definitions as well. So think about all of these things in terms of these definitions. Levels of measurement are important. We have a number of different levels, what we call levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. We have to decide in any study which kind of measurement we're doing. And each one is going to have different statistical methods. The example they give here is social security numbers. There's not, it's not a count. You can't subtract a social security number and say that's higher than this one, or that's bigger than this one, or whatever. In fact, since social security numbers are done based regionally, the only thing you can say is that when you got your social security number, you were living in a certain part of the country. The nominal measurement level is data that consists of names or labels or categories. In other words, qualitative data, not quantitative. They can't be arranged in an ordering scheme. You know, names, labels, categories, you can find sometimes, you can try alphabetical, but does that put a hierarchy on it? You know, we can arrange colors by the standard, you know, rainbow, our ROYGBV, remember? ROYGBV, ROYGBV. We can say that that's an order, but that's an arbitrary order. It doesn't say anything about red being a better color than blue. Okay? So we have these kinds of measurements. So we have at the nominal level, we have yes, no, or undecided. You cannot put a value on a yes, a no, or an undecided answer to a survey of would you rather have a Ford or a GM car, right? Yes, no, undecided. Okay, political party. Who cares? It doesn't say the political party is not something you can put in order, other than standardly they'll put things alphabetically. But that doesn't put a value on it. A is not a better letter than M. Okay. I guess it may depend on whether or not you are an A or an M. When I remember when we were years ago, many years ago at this point, when they were doing the mass immunizations against polio with the Salk vaccine, which was injectable, they lined us up in alphabetical order, which means I was at the front of the line. And there are two ways of looking at that. I got it over with first and didn't get to watch all the other kids in front of me scream and holler. Or I got to go first and that was scary. So who knows? Social security numbers, they're nominal. They're just a substitute for a name. Okay. The ordinal level says that they can be ordered, but differences are either meaningless or can't be determined. What's the difference between red and blue? Well, to a physicist, we can tell you the difference in frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum that lies on, but that's not going to mean doodly squat to most people. And again, it doesn't say which one is better. Course grades, A, B, C, D, or E, or F. We also had E for a while when I was growing up. It was really weird. We know that we can order these. A is a higher grade than B, etc. But we can't subtract them. There's the difference. We'd have to say, okay, the difference between A and B is that A is, say, 94% and higher, as is the case here. Or if we want to go even the entire range of A's, A minus is 90% and higher, the A range. The B range, 80% higher. So that might say that there's a difference of 10, but it's meaningless. It doesn't really, we can't subtract B from A and get anything useful out of it. So you've got two students, one has an 84 and the other a 94. The difference is 10, but that means nothing. Right, ranking colleges. You know, when the book was written, Harvard was ranked #1 and Princeton by number 2. And again, it depends on what you're interested in. Okay, so we won't go into who did the ranking or why. And then there's 3 and 4, which were Columbia and Yale. So what? Note that all of them are Northeastern colleges. So there's a wonderful story years ago, totally sidelined at this point, of a family went to a very wealthy family went to Harvard and wanted to give a large endowment if they would name it after their son who was deceased, who had died young. Harvard looked at him and said, "Oh, you're from California, you don't count. No, get out of here." So they went back to Palo Alto and founded Leland Stanford University with that endowment. And Stanford, I think, is right up there in the top few. But it does say something about, most of us look at Harvard or Princeton and think, so what? The ranking is nothing. If we subtract #1 from #2, it gives us 1. What does that mean? It means absolutely nothing. So although we can order these data, the differences are useless. And it depends on the parameters. The little school I went to in New Mexico almost annually lines up as the #1 affordable state institution for people interested in certain areas of geology and mining. And yet it's a school of 1,200 students that nobody's ever heard of that isn't interested in those fields. And so, it depends on what it is you're talking about. Okay, so we have that's the ordinal level. The interval level, you can put in order, and the differences have meaning, but there's no starting point. There's no 0 point that can be done. And where does that come in? Well, one place it comes in, quite frankly, is temperatures. Definitely 40 degrees Fahrenheit is colder than 90 degrees Fahrenheit by 50 degrees. But where's 0? 0 is colder than 40, clearly, but it's not a 0 temperature. 0 temperature, from a strictly scientific viewpoint, is 0 degrees Kelvin minus 459 degrees Fahrenheit, where all molecular and atomic motion ceases. Well, that doesn't happen anywhere in the universe. There is no 0. Okay, so, and in fact, we do have a 0 Fahrenheit. It happens to be 32 degrees below the freezing point of water. So we have negatives. In the same way with years. Yes, we can put years in order and we can say there is a difference. Some of them can be meaningful. Some of those differences aren't so meaningful, but they can be. But there isn't any year 0. Only in fiction do we find the concept of year 0. There is no natural starting point. So while we can look at differences, definitely 1776 is further in the future that are from 1492, so it can be ordered, depending on whether you're ordering from lower to higher or higher to lower. You can order these things. And we know that those differences are meaningful because of what goes on in the times between them. But there is no year 0. And finally, where we do have a 0 point, we can have what we call the ratio level. Car lengths are given here. The ratio, if they can be arranged in order, differences can be found that are meaningful, and there is a natural starting point of 0. Okay. Car lengths. A smart car, a length of 106 inches, and a Mercury Grand Marquis at 212. Definitely, these can be put in order. The Mercury Marquis is longer. In fact, it is twice as long as a smart car, which tells me that we can put 2 smart cars in a parking place that can hold 1 Mercury Marquis. Interesting thought. But 0 is a possibility. No car, no length at all. In other words, no car is a 0 length. Class time's the same thing. We can have no minutes for class time because there's no class, or we can have whatever we have. Okay. So all of these are the same. So we have these levels of measurement. I think at this point, we will stop here for the lecture portion of this class for today. We'll take a short break. We're only half an hour late for our second break. Part of that's my fault for being late coming back. So let's take a short break. I'm going to pause the recording so that everybody can take a break and we don't have just dead time. And then I'll pick it up again and we'll. Okay, let's go ahead and start again. I'd like to first take a look at this week's discussion. So they give you 3 different scenarios here. You've been asked to prepare a survey, collect data, and present to your employer. Your topic is to find out which item is the most popular in your store. Scenario number 2, you've been asked to prepare a survey, collect data, and present to your colleagues at the staff meeting. Your topic is on healthcare provided during an office visit. Number 3, you've been asked to prepare a survey, collect data, and present to your contractor. Your topic is on which software package is best for all basic computers, or which graphics package is best for the company. You have complete freedom to choose which of those you want to address. These are examples of why you may be asked to do something like this. You can probably come up with lots more, but let's stick with these. So again, the usual instructions, 150 words. Actually, this is a 300 level class, so it's 200 words. And 2 references. Okay. So again, so be careful to follow all of those parameters. So try and get this first post in by Wednesday night. I will be monitoring and responding myself. So we'll all be playing this game, and I've actually made my first post down here as well, and you can read that. So there is that. Let's go back a page here and go to, we'll talk about the in-class activity next class. Misleading graphs is the assignment. Now, in our weekly assignments, there are going to be a Word document and an Excel document. The Word document will describe what you're doing, and we'll ask you questions and you'll answer those. The Excel is the data that goes with that assignment. So let's take a look at this first one here, which I think I already have up. Maybe not. Week 1 assignment. Yes, here we go. So your week 1 assignment and this is worth 120 points. So you're going to look at the after-school activity graphs in the Excel file and the benefits of using the two different graphs. Okay, on the tab, and look at the tab that reads misleading. So the Excel file is set up in tabs. You've all used Excel enough, you understand that. The voting data in the Excel file, we'll look at that. Graph the data in a column and chart and a pie chart and compare and discuss the two. So again, you know how to do the graphing. You've all been through Apps 101. So you can do that. So go through this class of assignments and then answer some questions at the bottom. There's some questions at the bottom that you'll need to do as well. Okay. So that's the data there. Let's hold on. I forgot to share that. So hang on. Let's share that. Now you should be able to see it. Yeah. So this is the set of instructions that you have in the questions, and you'll answer all of those. So let's go back now to the misleading graphs, and now we have an Excel spreadsheet, and I don't think I have, no, I don't have that one up yet. So let's download that or take a look at it here. So here you have the spreadsheet. So here's the graph of after school activities, graph A and graph B. So you can look at each of these and discuss the benefits and possibly misleading material from that. So here we have another set of data that you can make use of as well. So I think I want to try and download that. Yes, thank you. Take a closer look at it. Come on. Okay, so we have misleading here, and then we have the sampling data. This data of sampling about college degrees, either have or working on. So those are the data that you have to deal with. And let's again share this. Okay, so you have the sampling tab and the misleading tab here. So we have these two graphs. So, and then on this tab as well, graph the following voting using a column bar graph. So follow the instructions on that as well. Okay, questions?
Yeah, sorry. I think you might have mentioned it, but I missed. We're going to be doing the assignment out of the textbooks we were just working out of, or is it the other one that's linked to the assignment?
You can use either one. This particular assignment is sort of agnostic as to which textbook you use. All you're doing is analyzing this data and answering the questions. You can find all of the answers in the first 2 chapters of both texts.
Okay.
Okay, everything you need there. I'm also going to find some information that I have online and email to you on how to do a survey. That'll help with your discussion. um, material. And I have a set of definitions that are actually more than we have talked about. And we'll get to more of those on Wednesday. But there's more definitions that you'll need as you go through this class. Okay, does that help, Candy?
Yep.
Okay.
Question.
Melissa,
So-
yes.
Excuse me, when we turn in our assignment, we'll be turning in 2 documents, an Excel and this document.
No, yes, you'll be turning in 2 documents because you'll be doing the graphing in Excel. Okay? So you'll turn in 2 documents and you can call them both assignment 1, just one's going to be an Excel spreadsheet and the other a Word doc. So shouldn't be a problem, okay? Okay, so let's go back to here. So that's that assignment and the discussion. The exam, I'm going to, the assessment that you have for this week, it says here you've got 1 attempt in 1 hour. I'm changing that. Since I consider assessments an opportunity to learn the material, you will be given 3 attempts and no time limit. Okay? And in fact, I'll edit that right this instant and fix it. No time limit, multiple attempts. We're going to have 3 attempts allowed, and you'll get to see the correct answers after the last attempt. And even though it's due on the weekend, it'll be open for another week, but please try and stay ahead of the game. This is a busy class. We'll be covering a lot of concepts. Now, another thing I'll say is anytime you have a question, email it to me. I will be here pretty much full-time during the days, Monday and Wednesday. I'll probably take off a little bit of time in the afternoon to do some chores here in town, but I will be I will check my email at least a couple of times a day and get back to you as soon as possible. If you run into a problem, please contact me. We can get all of anything taken care of. If you have problems with the textbook, let me know and I'll see what I can do. I can't promise that will be a fast fix if it's an issue with the book. However, I will do my best to help. Okay. Now, officially, we have about 20 minutes left to class. I'm going to stay here. I encourage you to go ahead and look at these things and ask any questions you may have about them while I'm still online, rather than wait until later to get that by email. Okay, so if there's nothing else, then we'll spend the rest of the time here just with you having a chance to get started on this week's work. And I'm going to rest my voice. Okay, well, class is at this point officially over. So Crystal and Candy, do you have any questions before we adjourn till Wednesday?
Not at this time, thank you.
Yeah, not right now.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for being here, and I hope that Wednesday's a better day. Keep an eye. If the school is closed, we'll be doing another Zoom session for everybody. And because we need to, we're already looking at a holiday on the 11th, which will be a shorter Zoom session, but nonetheless, it's going to be a busy mod. So I will see you all on Wednesday, I hope.
All right, sounds good. See you later.
Bye now.
Bye.
And have a good couple of days.